what if I told you that Cryo is saved and Ayaka is gonna be a top 5 DPS soon? However, there's a catch. Now, before we even talk about Ayaka or the catch or even the question of Cryo being saved, we first need to discuss Escoffier, since she is the one who pushes Ayaka to top tier status. So let's discuss her entire kit along with all of her issues as well as correcting some of the misinformation floating about her in the community. But before we start, I'd like to mention two things. First is that she is a Cryo based polearm unit who prefers Cryo and Hydro units in the team. Second is that going forward in this video, I'll be calling her by her nickname Coffee. So with all this being said, let's get right into it. Starting off with her elemental skill, which has two versions, tap and hold. So when you tap the skill button, she summons a cooking pot which deals cryo damage to the enemy every second for a total of 21 times. And the good thing about this pot is that it follows the active character, so enemies can't really get out of its range. However, if you are using Nouvellette for instance who attacks from a distance, then you are also being chilling, since the range of this cooking pot is quite decent, roughly equal to the circular dry patch of land around Masanori. Now, the crazy thing about her skill is that it has a 100% uptime with its duration far exceeding its cooldown. And if you are wondering how does this cooking pot even choose its target, well, it seems to be proximity based, so it'll attack whichever enemy is close by. Moving on to her burst, which is just a big cryo AoE attack along with a single tick of team-wide healing, and that's it. However, her passives are what push her to be a top tier support. The first passive essentially makes it so that after the burst, the active character is healed for an additional 9 seconds on top of the team-wide heal for a total of 9 times. The second passive is the one which locks her to cryo and hydro teammates only. But what exactly does this passive do, you ask? Well, you see, this passive shreds the resistance of any enemy hit by her skill or burst by 55% for 12 seconds as long as the team has 4 cryo or hydro units. But what if you have less than 4 cryo or hydro teammates? Well, in that case, the rest shred is substantially less, being 15% for 3, 10% for 2 and 5% for 1. And well, at that levels, it's simply not good, thus kinda restricting her to hydro and cryo teammates. But this doesn't mean there are no viable non-cryo or hydro teams. In fact, there are many, but those teams will probably do less damage than if you were to run in with another unit. Now, since we are done discussing the combat part of her kit, let's just quickly go over the whole version of her skill, since that has a lot of misinformation being spread about it. Okay, so if you hold the E button, Coffee summons her cooking pot in the front like parametric transformer, and then you gotta do elemental attacks on it, and after 7 elemental attacks, her cooking pot will produce 1 dish. Now this process can be repeated for a total of 10 times per week, with the chances of getting a 3-star, 4-star or 5-star dish being 60, 30 and 10%. Also, his ability to make 10 food items resets every Monday, regardless of what day the cooking pot was used in the previous week. And if you have been enjoying the video so far, then a sub to the channel would be beautiful. So now that we understand her kit, what major issue am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about skill issue. On a serious note, the issue definitely has to do with skill. And what do I mean by that? Well, you see, Coffee's best teams are with Ayaka, Ryosley, Ganyu and Nouvellette. And besides the Nouvellette team, all others have survivability issues, especially in Abyss. But you might say that Coffee is a great healer, and honestly, you aren't wrong in saying that. However, an average player doing Abyss will most definitely get one-shotted or even two-shotted by enemies. But once again, you might say that Citlali could be used in her teams. After all, she is a shielder who is a cryo unit, thus fulfilling Coffee's requirement of a cryo or hydro character. And well, once again, you aren't wrong in thinking that. However, let me just say this. If you're gonna die even with 3000 healing per second, then a 10k shield ain't doing shit for you. Now of course, if you are a god gamer who can dodge everything, then whatever I said before doesn't apply to you. But if not, then good luck. And speaking of Citlali, another issue with her in the team is that you will have to give up on either using TTDS with her or scroll, because the attack timing simply won't line up. For instance, in a team of let's say Coffee, Ayaka, Kurina and Citlali,
Editor here. And one thing I forgot to mention was that the rotation I'm considering here is Fiorina, followed by Coffee, Citlali, and finally Ayaka. Now, in this rotation,
scroll probably won't be activated because Citlali won't be the one to trigger any reactions, therefore not activating scroll. If instead you use Citlali right after Furina but before Coffee, then scroll will be activated for sure, but you'll lose out on the TTDS buff. And due to this issue, Citlali becomes an okayish teammate for her, with better replacements being Yelan or Shenhe.
Editor here. And one thing I forgot to mention was that Nouvellette is an exception to the Citlali problem since he scales off of HP, so Citlali works with him because you don't want want TTDS for him anyways.
Okay, so let's backtrack a bit to the statement I made a minute ago. If you're gonna die even with 3000 healing per second, then a 10k shield ain't doing for you. Now, if you're wondering about the 3k healing and how it compares to other units, then I'd say that she's on par with Shilonen. But wait, Shilonen does over 6k healing per tick. Then how is she even comparable to Coffee? Well, you see, if we assume standard build on Coffee with 2k attack, then first of all, immediately after using the burst, the party will be healed for 8.3k per character, followed by single character healing of 3.1k per tick. And if you add these together, you get a total healing of 8.3 into 4 plus 3.1 into 9, which gives you 61k healing in total. In comparison, if we assume Shilonen on Favonia's build with 3k defense and no Furina in team, you get a healing of 6.4k per tick, totaling 51k, which is less than what you are getting with Coffee. Now, the reason I like her healing a bit more is the initial team-wide heal with her burst, which is really good for Furina stacks and breathing life into units who are almost dead. With all this being said, does this mean that cryo is safe, that cryo is cooking now, that cryo is meta, that cryo has been made great again? Yes and no. While I do think that her healing is really solid and her off-field damage combined with her buffs is really strong, which let's be honest is something freeze teams really need, I personally don't think this alone can save cryo. Cause for me, saving an element doesn't just mean pull one unit and have it on every team. Rather, it's something done to the element itself which will make it stronger, like how Dendro did with Electro. And this is where Imaginarium Theater comes into play. Now, if you're confused about what I just yapped, then allow me to explain. You see, 5.6 Theater has a new reaction between cryo and Dendro called Rhinegrass, and without going into its specifics, this is exactly what I think is needed to save cryo. Not this exact reaction per se, but a revamped version of it in version 6.0, cause that'll enable even old cryo characters to become great again, like how Kaching became a good unit with the introduction of Dendro. And besides introducing a new reaction, we also need buffs to existing cryo reactions like freeze or shatter to quote-unquote save the element. Now finally, let's discuss what I said in the beginning about Ayaka being a top 5 DPS with a catch. You see, I still stand by the statement that Ayaka will become top 5 DPS with the release of Coffee, theoretically. And what do I mean by that? Well, generally, theoretical damage doesn't always translate to actual in-game damage because of factors like dodging, crit issues, and with Ayaka in particular, her burst hitting the enemy continuously. So it's generally recommended to take tactical damage as 70% of theoretical damage, which don't get me wrong, is still really good, but not top 5 DPS level. With all this being said, I believe that Coffee is a really strong unit within her niche, but not necessarily limited to it. While her value drops outside of freeze teams, she still performs well in other compositions outside of it. And unlike people claiming that her damage capabilities while being a support unit are bad for the game, I think her damage is extremely justified since freeze lacks any noticeable damage from reactions. Overall, I'd say that she is a really powerful unit without being overpowered and an extremely valuable unit to get if you are a fan of Cryo, Ayaka, or prepping for Skirk and the Cryo Archon. But hey,
that's just a theory. A game theory.